After I conquered Paul, we got married. There was nothing earth-shattering about it. Yet our days were peaceful and tender, until one day, when I learned that the heroine had divorced. He sat alone in the study all night, and in that moment, I finally understood. The fate of a devoted male supporting role is to silently guard the heroine. No matter what anyone does, that destiny cannot be changed. So I exited gracefully and left alone. The next time we met was when I returned to the country with my fiancé to hold our wedding, and Paul was the childhood best friend my fiancé often spoke of. He was also one of our groomsmen. Chapter 1. Jack and I returned home to hold our wedding ceremony, but unexpectedly, he got into a car accident. When I rushed to the hospital, tears kept falling down my face. You were drinking and still decided to drive? If you don't want to get married, just say so. Jack straightened up, pulled me into his arms, and soothed me with a soft laugh. After I worked so hard to get you to say yes, how could I dare get myself killed? It wasn't me driving, it was my best friend. He hadn't been drinking. Who could have known such a mistake would happen? Just as he finished speaking, movement came from the next bed. My fiancé pulled open the curtain lazily and said to the person beside him, "You're awake. Perfect timing. Hurry and explain things to my wife. If she gets mad and dumps me, I swear I'll kill you." I glared at him. Even at a time like this, he still couldn't be serious. His best friend said nothing. Jack glanced over and frowned immediately. "Paul, what are you staring at?" Hearing that name, my heart clenched. No way. Could it really be that much of a coincidence? My body stiffened slightly. Slowly, I turned around. The moment our eyes met, my breath caught. Paul, my ex-husband, the man I once conquered. Chapter 2. When I first arrived in this world, the male and female leads had already confessed their feelings for each other. Paul was deeply dejected. His grades plummeted, and his whole spirit dimmed. I had to conquer him according to the system's task, otherwise, I wouldn't survive. So I used every method I could think of. He liked cheerful girls like the heroine, bright as sunlight, so I tried my best to mold myself into that kind of person. Every day I pestered him to talk, bringing him handmade sweets of all kinds. At basketball games, I waved pom-poms and shouted his name across the court with all my might. Even when he gently rejected me, I pretended not to understand and kept following him stubbornly. But in truth, I was an introverted, quiet person. No matter how hard I tried to act otherwise, it was just a poor imitation. I once thought the conquest was hopeless, until one day, the system suddenly spoke. "Host, your affection value has reached 100. Congratulations. You've earned permanent residence in this world." Then it vanished. I couldn't find the reason for the success. Alongside excitement, unease crept in. What if it was all just a dream? Paul sensed my emotions keenly. Under the sunlight, his smile was warm and dazzling. "Elizabeth, just be yourself. I like you that way." It turned out he had long seen through all my awkward attempts and nervous overreactions. After that, our relationship grew comfortable and natural. Without the task hanging over me, our feelings deepened even more. After graduation, we got married. We spent our days working, doing chores, and watching movies together. A steady, ordinary life, that was what suited us best. Then one night, he received a call. A woman's trembling voice came through the line. On the edge of tears, I knew who it was. The heroine, Sandra. She and the male lead had divorced. Paul got up and went into the study, not returning for the entire night. After that, his schedule changed. He left early, came home late, and sometimes I even saw them together at overlapping work events. Sandra had become his assistant. I couldn't tell whether I felt more sadness or relief, but I knew it was time for me to start living differently. We both disliked quarrels, so when I proposed divorce, he didn't hesitate long before agreeing. The property I received was enough for me to live comfortably for a lifetime. Because of him, I was reborn. I hadn't suffered much through the conquest. Instead, I'd found myself again. From my heart, I wished him happiness, and in the 5 years that followed, I found mine too. But fate loves its cruel jokes. Paul was the very same childhood friend Jack had mentioned before we returned home. Chapter 3. Paul's gaze on my face was so intense that it felt almost tangible. Even Jack noticed that something was off. He frowned, and his voice turned cold. "You know Elizabeth?" At the sound of my name, Paul's eyelashes trembled slightly. His pale lips grew even paler. I spoke before he could. "A classmate from high school. We met a few times." Paul quickly regained his composure. He propped himself up with one arm and gave me a polite smile. "Elizabeth. Long time no see." Jack's expression eased a little, but then he took my hand, deliberately showing off the diamond ring on my finger. It was both a declaration of ownership and a silent warning. He followed up my words with a grin. "He's not as handsome as me. Don't look at him." I couldn't help but laugh. "You're shameless. Who brags about themselves like that?" The tension in the air slowly faded. I didn't look at Paul again. It was as if we were just strangers who had crossed paths a few times. Jack only had a few scrapes. It wasn't serious. After finishing his discharge paperwork, I turned around and found Paul standing right behind me. His right arm was in a cast, and he looked a little disheveled. Chapter 4. I'll tell Jack about our past after we move abroad. Otherwise, with his personality, I rubbed my temples, feeling helpless. Jack was the kind of person who drew clear lines between love and hate, but every emotion he felt showed right on his face. He knew I'd been married before, but he didn't know my ex-husband was Paul. If I told him now, the two of them wouldn't stay friends, and worse, things might get ugly. "Is he good to you?" Paul's sudden question caught me off guard. I froze for a second. "He's good." Talking about such things with an ex felt strange. The air between us grew quiet. Just as I stood up, a woman came rushing toward us. She brushed past me and went straight to Paul, naturally holding his arm to inspect it. "Paul, why didn't you tell me you were in a car accident? Your hand's injured? Is it serious? Will it affect your drawings?" It was Sandra. She looked much more mature than in our younger days, but her features were still striking. Paul gently pushed her away. "I'm fine." Sandra blinked, finally noticing me. Her expression shifted slightly before she forced a smile. "Elizabeth. Long time no see." I nodded, thinking for a moment before explaining. "We just ran into each other by chance and chatted for a bit. I came back to get married." "I see." She let out an almost imperceptible sigh of relief. Paul pressed his lips together. His left hand clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Chapter 5. That night, I was leaning against Jack's chest as we watched a horror movie together. The plot was so dull that neither of us was really paying attention. I hesitated, unsure whether to tell him the truth right then, but Jack suddenly spoke up. "Let's not have Paul be our groomsman after all." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Why?" I asked. Jack rubbed his nose against my neck playfully. "He's injured, it's inconvenient, and the symbolism isn't great. It might jinx our perfect love." I turned to look at him, surprised. "You're superstitious now?" He didn't confirm or deny it, just a feeling. He said casually, "And the way he looks at you feels off. I hope I'm just imagining things. Otherwise, that friendship is done." I looked away, expressionless. As expected, it was better to wait until after the wedding to tell him. Jack had lived abroad for years. Now that he was finally back, he naturally had a string of dinners with old friends. Since I didn't want to risk running into Paul or their mutual friends, I usually didn't go. In truth, hardly anyone had known about my marriage back then. We were both quiet types, skipped the big ceremony, went straight to the honeymoon, treating it as a travel wedding. Even on social media, we never showed our faces. It was basically a hidden marriage. After declining too many invitations, Jack eventually held me pitifully in his arms. "Wife, just come with me once, please? Otherwise, I'll look so miserable." I raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you afraid I'll run into Paul?" "I didn't invite him. These are my high school friends. He doesn't know them." I couldn't resist his puppy dog expression and finally agreed. When we arrived at the private room, everyone there was unfamiliar to me. I relaxed, listening to them share all kinds of funny stories about Jack's past embarrassments. The mood was light and cheerful, until Paul opened the door and walked in. Sandra followed behind him, looking like she'd tried but failed to stop him. Chapter 6. Seeing that Paul came with Sandra, Jack's expression softened a little. "You're still hurt. Why are you running around?" Paul's voice was calm. It's not my legs that are hurt. Why can't I move around? There was an edge to his tone, and when he said that, his gaze fell squarely on me. The whole room went silent. No one knew what was going on. Jack stepped in front of me, jaw tight, struggling to contain his anger. How did you know we were here? A lazy voice came from outside the door. Of course I told him. I've been trying to get this guy out for ages, now that he's got a wife. He's forgotten all about his old buddies. Huh? My breath hitched. That was one of the very few people who knew about my marriage to Paul. When I looked up, my eyes met Pablo's. He stumbled back, startled. Holy shit, Elizabeth? You? Jack turned his head sharply, his expression cold and cutting. You know her? Pablo immediately realized something was wrong. He stammered, trying to backtrack. Yeah. We've met a few times. Just surprised. That's all. Haha. The vein on Jack's temple pulsed, his whole body drawn tight like a bowstring. Someone tried to step in and defuse the tension. Surprisingly, Jack didn't press further. I've had too much to drink tonight. Not going to the next round. I'll take my wife home first. I stood and took his outstretched hand. The pressure of his grip told me just how hard he was fighting to stay calm. I kept my face composed, offering the others an apologetic smile. Sorry. We'll catch up next time. Paul's gaze dropped from our intertwined hands. He looked like he'd been drinking too. His eyes were slightly red. Then he said, quietly but clearly, "She's my ex-wife." Chapter 7. That calm voice was like a spark landing in a barrel of gunpowder, igniting the rage that had barely been held back. Jack turned around and punched him square in the face. His teeth clenched. You're saying this now? What the hell do you mean by it? Sandra rushed to help Paul, her face full of panic. Jack, what's wrong with you? He's still injured. Jack pulled his hand back and let out a cold, derisive laugh. He's been eyeing my wife. Serves him right. You're insane. They're in the past. You two have been brothers for over 20 years. Sandra glared at Jack angrily, but Paul brushed her hand away. His gaze cut through the crowd and locked onto my face. Sharp, unwavering. Our eyes met. No longer calm. Can't move on. His voice was soft, almost like he was speaking to himself, yet clear enough for everyone to hear. The room went utterly silent. Pablo covered his face, unable to watch. Sandra turned pale, tears slowly welling in her eyes. Paul stood up and walked toward Jack. Despite the split on his lip, there was a storm in his eyes, one I'd never seen before. Eyeing your wife, he said hoarsely. She was my wife first. You're the one who took advantage of my absence. The real thief. Jack's fury exploded. Paul, you're asking for it. Each punch landed harder than the last. Paul refused to back down. The two of them were hitting each other like they meant to kill. Pablo rushed forward to break them apart, nearly crying. Stop it! Paul's hand is still injured. What if it gets worse? When he realized his words weren't working, he turned to me for help. Desperate. Elizabeth, come on. Maybe you can stop them? I smiled gently. Go ahead. Keep fighting. If one of you dies, even better. Both men froze instantly. Chapter 8. The cool night breeze carried the faint brine of the river, damp and sharp, cooling the heat of anger in my chest. I looked coldly at the man across from me, his injuries still bandaged, and now a few new bruises on his face. Are you sober now? I asked flatly. I'm sorry. Paul lowered his eyes, unable to meet mine. I almost laughed from sheer exasperation. Do you think I wanted an apology? I thought I made everything clear that day. Avoiding each other's presence. That was supposed to be our unspoken agreement. I'd done my best to keep that boundary. And what had he done? I looked out at the shimmering river, taking a deep breath. Paul, I really don't understand what you were thinking. Why did you have to embarrass everyone like that? His voice was hoarse. I don't understand either. Just like I don't understand how you could walk away so calmly back then. 5 years. He said bitterly, not a word, not a trace. When he lifted his gaze to me, his entire being seemed drowned in sorrow. Elizabeth, I've thought about it all these years. Did you ever really love me? I couldn't comprehend it. What's the point of saying this now? I want an answer. His dark eyes fixed stubbornly on me. Unyielding, I turned to look at Jack, who was leaning against the car not far away. The wind picked up again, carrying with it his restless tension. Paul followed my gaze, his eyes clouding even more. I told him quietly, I did love you once, but later, you became my comfort zone. My habit, like bottled water, essential, maybe, but never irreplaceable. Chapter 9. Paul and I traveled to many countries during our honeymoon. When we arrived at an island, the tour guide told us it was famous for paragliding. It was the kind of thrilling sport I had never tried before. Colorful arcs filled the blue sky, accompanied by joyful, uninhibited shouts. My heartbeat quickened, and a warm rush spread through my body. I wanted to try it. Paul held my hand. It's too dangerous. We can do something else. But his eyes lingered on that breathtaking view for a long time, and I could clearly see the trace of nostalgia flickering in them. Sandra had once shown me their childhood photo albums. In one of them, there was a picture of them paragliding together at 15. I couldn't help but wonder, in that moment, was he really worried for my safety? Or was he secretly protecting a memory that once belonged to the two of them alone? Later, I understood. Love becomes weighty because of difference. Paul was a genius architect, admired by everyone. He took on landmark, large-scale projects that defined city skylines. Yet after Sandra's divorce, he personally designed her new home. Every night he spent sketching in his study. His eyes shone brighter than the desk lamp itself, lit with joy. Sandra's ex-husband, the so-called male lead of the story, once came to see me. He looked at me with pity. Your husband spends all day with the woman he's loved for years, and you're really not bothered by it? When Paul found out, he explained it to me immediately. He cheated on her, and he keeps bothering her. I'm just protecting her for now. Elizabeth, don't misunderstand. He looked flustered for once. My tone was calm. It's okay. I don't mind. Paul seemed momentarily stunned. And truly, I didn't mind. I'd always been a passive person, measuring how much love to give based on how much others gave me. Just like Paul's love for Sandra and me, there were always degrees, lighter and heavier, less and more. My love for him followed the same rhythm. When his love for me was most intense, I loved him too. Then, slowly, that love became habit. I thought living quietly like that for a lifetime wasn't so bad. But now it just felt like freedom after breaking invisible chains. If both the hero and heroine of this world could break from their destined paths and choose new lives, then why should I continue living in this lukewarm, slow-boiling comfort? When the comfort zone stops being comfortable, when habit no longer makes life easier, and when I realized that bottled water isn't as irreplaceable as plain water, and far less refreshing than sparkling drinks, I knew it was time to change my way of living. On our third wedding anniversary, Paul prepared a candlelit dinner with great care. He even turned off his phone. Just the two of us tonight, he said softly. I have something to tell you. As always, we were perfectly in sync. My heart pounded, warmth spreading through me, just like when I'd first seen the paragliders in the sky. Only this time, I would act on it. I have something to tell you too, I said, under his expectant gaze. I smiled and took out a divorce agreement. Paul, let's get divorced. Chapter 10. What did you say to him? He looked like he was about to fall apart. Jack toyed idly with my fingers, pretending not to care, but the faint jealousy in his tone betrayed him. I knew he wasn't in a good mood, so I gently intertwined my fingers with his. Do you want to know? I asked softly. The driver, sensing the tension, quietly raised the partition. Jack leaned back and closed his eyes, exhaustion written across his face. Forget it, he murmured. It wasn't really the right place to talk. I glanced at our still-clasped hands, his grip firm and unwilling to let go, so I didn't push it. When I entered the code at the gate and the crystal chandelier flickered to life, Jack's kiss came down like a sudden storm. He always kissed like that, fierce, consuming, as if stealing my breath was the only way to survive. By the time my knees went weak, I was clinging to him, gasping for air. He was clearly shaken that night, his emotions far more turbulent than usual. He lifted me onto the entryway cabinet, his arms caging me in, leaving no room to escape. When that aggressive, desperate kiss finally ended. The lights went out, darkness returned, the house fell into silence. Broken only by the sound of our ragged breathing, I rested my hands on his broad shoulders, trying to steady the frantic beat of my heart. Suddenly, something cool and wet touched the hollow of my neck. Tears. Jack was crying. "What's wrong?" I whispered. He turned his head away, not wanting me to see his vulnerability. A long silence passed before I heard his voice, low and trembling. "Elizabeth, you're not going to leave me again, right?" Chapter 11. 5 years ago. After the divorce, after leaving the country, the very first thing I did was finally try paragliding. Something I had once feared but longed for. When it was over, my legs were trembling so badly I could barely stand. But my face couldn't hide the exhilaration. Jack reached out and caught me before I fell. That was the first time we met. A brief encounter between strangers, yet the conversation flowed effortlessly. He thought I was an extreme sports enthusiast. After we exchanged contacts, he shared all kinds of tips and hidden adventure spots with me. Soon we were climbing mountains, surfing, skiing together. Those few months were more vibrant and alive than the entire first half of my life. Jack introduced me to many friends, and little by little, I began to feel like I truly belonged somewhere again. As we got closer, some of them would tease us. They said they'd never seen Jack so patient with anyone before. I just smiled, saying nothing. My previous marriage hadn't been miserable, but it hadn't been fulfilling either, so I didn't resist the idea of starting something new. Something that felt natural. During one rock climbing trip, my anchor point failed, and I was left dangling midair. Jack swung across to reach me, risking his life and nearly getting struck by falling stones. In that moment, I couldn't tell if it was the suspension bridge effect or something deeper. I kissed him, just a brief touch, then I pulled away. Jack's clear eyes reflected my flushed face. After a long pause, he said hoarsely, "No wonder Gina said today would be my lucky day." Gina was a fortune teller. I laughed at that, and for once, following my heart didn't feel so wrong. Chapter 12. After Jack and I got together, he learned everything about me by heart. My tastes, my habits, my favorite foods, the way I liked my coffee. He took care of everything, what I ate, what I wore, where I went, even when we were apart for short periods. He'd report every little detail of his day to me. Our friends often said his care and attentiveness were almost inhuman. They couldn't imagine that someone so wild, sharp-edged, and addicted to adrenaline could become so clingy when in love. But only I saw the side of Jack that no one else knew. His possessiveness was terrifying, so intense it bordered on obsession, even madness. He couldn't stand me talking to other men, even if it was just normal conversation. The frightening part was that Jack hid it well. All those dark, turbulent emotions were buried beneath a calm, charming mask, until one day, I accidentally found a hidden compartment, and inside it, his diary. It was filled with words so fervent, so suffocatingly full of love for me, that I could barely bear to read them. He wrote that he was afraid of hurting me, so, to stay rational, he used pain to remind himself to stay in control. I once saw him with my own eyes, standing in the bathroom, dragging a blade across his waist and abdomen. Again and again, I'd always believed in reciprocating affection equally, but Jack's love had long surpassed what I could comprehend. I couldn't return it, and if we continued like that, it would destroy both of us. So I left. To my surprise, he didn't chase after me, didn't call, didn't come. A full year passed in utter calm. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd wake up haunted by the memory of that blood-streaked bathroom. Humans are complicated creatures, unable to accept fully, yet incapable of letting go completely. Then one day, I received an email from a ski resort. It was about a graffiti wall, something Jack and I had contributed to during a one-year promise event. The resort had promised to send us updated photos every year. A marketing gimmick, really, but it carried beautiful memories. When I opened the email, I froze. There were no other visitors' drawings left. The wall had become Jack's personal diary. Line after line, he recorded his life, week by week, He wrote that he'd started seeing a therapist, just as I'd asked him to, that he'd adopted a Samoyed and took it out in the sun on weekends, that he'd collected rare horror films I'd probably love, that he'd become a much better cook. And his friends all praised him for it, that his wounds had healed, and he no longer hurt himself. A cool drop touched my chin, and only then did I realize I was crying. I hadn't cried when I divorced Paul. I hadn't cried when I broke up with Jack. So why was I crying now? The sadness hit late, but deep, cutting straight through my heart. Turns out, I missed him too. Chapter 13. Jack, take a deep breath. Look at me. He obeyed quietly. The soft golden light from the city poured in through the window, illuminating the helplessness and fragility on his face like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. I cupped his face in my hands. It's because I love you so much that I decided to wait until after the wedding to tell you everything. You're afraid I'll leave you, I said gently, and I'm afraid you'd resent me for my past. Jack's eyes were wet and confused. His throat worked as he whispered, "You know I'd never think that way." "Of course I know," I said softly. I knew him too well. He would only sink into anxiety, always fearful that one day I'd disappear again, and if it got worse, he might hurt himself again. The only thing I could do was give him enough sense of security to silence those fears. But I didn't want anything to taint our wedding. You wanted to know what I said to Paul, right? Jack's jaw tensed. He looked up at me, his gaze unwavering. I told him this. I said, "I love Jack very much. Please be a good person, and don't try to come between us. Now you know how deeply I love you, don't you?" His eyelashes trembled, like he was embarrassed. Then he slumped into my arms, murmuring softly, Still worried?" I asked. "Yes," he admitted, muffled against my chest. I let out a quiet sigh, half helpless, half indulgent. This was what it meant to be spoiled by love, and I was willing to spoil him. I bent down, brushed a kiss against his cool earlobe. "Then, how about feeling my love tonight?" Jack's muscles tensed instantly. He swept me into his arms, carrying me back to the bedroom, eager to prove, over and over, that I still belonged to him. And patiently, I answered that need again and again. The therapist once said that the touch, the embrace, the kiss of a lover could be the best medicine for two wounded souls. As he found comfort, I, too, felt an indescribable peace and happiness that words could never fully capture. Chapter 14. Sandra stood outside Paul's house for a long time. Exhaustion and sorrow lingered between her brows, like shadows that refused to fade. She sighed and raised her hand to enter the passcode. It was Paul and Elizabeth's wedding anniversary. Inside, everything looked exactly the same as it had 5 years ago. Fresh flowers filled the vase. A half-finished chessboard lay on the table. In the cloakroom, Elizabeth's clothes still hung neatly in order. Every season, Paul bought new ones for her, as if she were merely away on a long trip, and would one day come home. But she was getting remarried now. What on earth was he still clinging to? Sandra walked straight to the study. Paul was there, the desk lamp casting a pale halo over him. He was hunched over his drafting table, completely focused, not even glancing her way. The wastebasket overflowed with crumpled paper balls. Cold, untouched food sat on the table's edge. He hadn't eaten a bite. He had been locking himself in this room for days, working without rest. Finally, Sandra snapped. "You don't go to the firm. You don't eat. What are you even doing, Paul?" Dark circles shadowed his eyes, but there was no hint of fatigue in his voice. "I'm designing our wedding house," he said hoarsely. Sandra froze. Her mind flashed back to her own divorce. Those nights full of helplessness, not knowing who to talk to, and the moment she dialed his number without thinking. Paul had always been her safe harbor. She knew, she had always known, that Paul liked her, and because she couldn't return those feelings, she had carried guilt in her heart for years. So when Elizabeth appeared, Sandra was genuinely happy for them. She had shown Elizabeth their childhood photo albums, shared stories only she and Paul once knew, even helped her understand him better. She'd gone so far as to plan group trips for the four of them, hoping to bring Paul and Elizabeth closer. But when the news came that they were truly together, Sandra found that her smile felt strained. A voice whispered inside her, "It shouldn't have been like this." That uneasy feeling reached its peak on their wedding day, when she saw that simple announcement post online. It lodged in her throat like a stone. An intrusive question echoed in her mind. Could Paul really love someone else? Would he still care for me the way he always had? The answer came in a single phone call. His voice, as gentle as ever, full of concern. As long as she said the word, he would still come, without hesitation. Sandra felt her chest loosen. A faint smile crept across her lips. But guilt quickly followed. Paul was married now. She wasn't the kind of woman who destroyed marriages. She just needed someone to lean on. Paul was family. Surely Elizabeth couldn't expect him to erase years of friendship just because of a ring, right? Sandra told herself that, and her conscience quieted. She became Paul's assistant without hesitation. Let him design her new home, and sometimes dropped by their house to deliver documents and discuss design details. Elizabeth remained gentle as ever. In her clear, calm eyes, there wasn't a trace of forced tolerance or jealousy. And somehow, that made Sandra even more uncomfortable, as if she'd been seen through completely. So one day, she asked, "Do you think Elizabeth minds me being around?" Paul looked at the framed photo on his desk. Silent for a long moment, Sandra's heart began to pound. She knew she wouldn't like his answer. Finally, he said quietly, "Our wedding anniversary is coming soon. Your ex-husband shouldn't be bothering you anymore. You should resign." Sandra's mind went blank. The days they'd spent together, the shared laughter, the quiet understanding, all flashed through her memory. Only then did she truly realize how precious his love had been, and she couldn't let it go anymore. Chapter 15. When Sandra learned that Paul and Elizabeth had divorced, her first reaction was shock, followed immediately by a flicker of uncontrollable delight. She didn't want to know why they divorced. Elizabeth was gone, and that meant Sandra could finally, rightfully, stay by his side again. They had grown up together. Wasn't it perfectly natural for her to accompany him through his darkest days? Even Paul's parents encouraged her to look after him more, their words always carrying subtle hints that they preferred her, that she was the one most suited for him. After all, they had known each other since childhood. Who could be a better match? For 5 years, Sandra hadn't dared to pierce that fragile veil between them. She followed him like family, stubbornly, patiently, always there. She believed that one day, Paul would finally see her again. But instead, he only grew worse with time, as if someone had ripped out his soul, leaving behind a hollow shell. Why? They had known each other for more than 20 years. How long had Elizabeth even been in his life? How could he love her so much, so deeply that it destroyed him? It wasn't fair, not to Sandra, when she saw him in that private room, losing his mind and throwing punches over Elizabeth. Something in her finally broke. Tears streamed down her face as she cried out, "Haven't I done enough? Why do you still treat me like this?" Pablo, leaning against the wall with a cigarette, looked at her with open disdain. "What are you so proud of? Moved by your own devotion? If it weren't for you, they'd never have divorced in the first place. Keep lying to yourself if you want, but don't take the rest of us for fools." She froze. Lying to herself? Then what about Paul? Wasn't he lying to himself too? For 5 years, she had endured the whispers, the judgmental stares, and Paul's cold distance. Even her ex-husband had mocked her. "So you're no different from me after all," he'd said. Why did she have to carry the blame for their failed marriage? She was done being the scapegoat. She was done with all of it. Chapter 16. The tightly wound string in Sandra's mind finally snapped. With a scream, she lunged forward and tore Paul's blueprints to shreds. Her voice cracked, trembling with fury, still pretending to be some tragic lover. "Are you? When you found out I was divorced, can you honestly say you felt nothing? When you asked me to be your assistant, don't tell me there wasn't even a hint of selfishness. And when you designed my new house, you didn't think back, even once." To those days when it was just the two of us? Her words came sharp and relentless, each one stabbing into his skull like needles. Paul's head throbbed violently. A wave of nausea rolled through his chest. He bent over, choking, one hand gripping the edge of the desk. His wrist bones jutted out beneath pale skin, a thin, fragile frame trembling with exhaustion. His throat felt stuffed with cotton. He couldn't vomit, couldn't swallow, could barely breathe. When he finally looked up at her, his voice was low, ragged. "You're right. I did waver. But before I could even figure out what I'd done wrong, she had already let me go. I don't even know when her love for me disappeared," he whispered. "And when I realized it was gone, do you have any idea how terrified I was?" Sandra had never seen him like this, so broken, so utterly lost. And for the first time, she felt an ache of pity for herself. "You still can't let her go," she said bitterly. "But what difference does it make? Elizabeth is marrying your brother. You can't change that." Paul's eyes went bloodshot. He roared, "Jack is not my brother. He's a thief. Elizabeth is mine. She was meant for me." Sandra instinctively stumbled backward. In that moment, she realized with horror, Paul had completely lost his mind. Chapter 17. After saying it aloud, Paul only grew more convinced. Through countless sleepless nights, he kept replaying everything in his mind. Why had Elizabeth suddenly transferred to his school? Why had her family never once appeared? Why had she forced herself to be near him, when it was clear she hadn't liked him at all? Yes, Paul had seen what Elizabeth looked like when she truly loved him, and that was exactly why he knew. At the very beginning, she hadn't. Her closeness had felt deliberate, as if she'd been trying to complete some sort of task. He remembered the way she'd looked when he rejected her, the resistance written all over her face. He remembered the flush of her cheeks after she cheered for him on the basketball court. She'd smiled at him, yes, but her eyes had been filled with despair. Back then, Paul hadn't understood. He didn't know that curiosity was the beginning of his downfall. He never expected to really fall for her. When had she truly started to smile from the heart? He thought back to the moment he told her, "Just be yourself. I like you that way." Paul had loved the real her. That day, Elizabeth clung to him, sobbing, whispering thank you over and over again, as if he had saved her life. Paul's eyelids twitched. Every time he tried to think about Elizabeth's past, her origins, his mind fogged over, lost in a haze of confusion and dissonance. His instincts screamed at him to confirm his suspicion. There was only one way. Paul sank into the water-filled bathtub. The sharp blade reflected his bloodshot eyes. And yet, there was a frightening spark of excitement in them. Without hesitation, he sliced open his wrist. Crimson spilled into the clear water, spreading like blooming flowers. And as he hovered on the brink of death, he heard a faint, distant sigh in his mind. If you knew this would happen, why did you start at all? Chapter 18. The day before the wedding. I went to the salon I'd booked for a manicure and spa session. Jack was supposed to come with me, but something urgent came up at the last minute. As I stepped into the elevator, a faint unease twisted in my chest. I almost called him, wanting to tell him to be careful. Ding, the elevator doors opened. I looked up, and my pupils shrank in shock. Before I could react, a cloth soaked in something pungent clamped over my nose and mouth. The world went dark. When I woke, my head was splitting apart. A strange ceiling loomed above me. Then came the sound of a door opening. I sighed softly. "You're awake." A familiar, gentle voice. "I'll make you your favorite omelette rice. You must be hungry." For a moment, I was lost in a daze of disbelief. Then came the clinking sound of chains, and my mind snapped back. I looked down. My ankle was shackled, though someone had thoughtfully wrapped cotton around the inside, as if afraid it might hurt me. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. "Paul, people's tastes change. I don't even like omelette rice anymore." He was frighteningly thin now, his once soft, gentle eyes hollow and distant. Paul froze for a brief second, then smiled faintly. "That's okay. Whatever you want, I'll make it for you." A wave of exhaustion hit me. Two people who had parted on peaceful terms. How had it come to this? What are you trying to do? I asked. Paul's voice was calm, almost tender. I'm just taking back what's mine. I frowned. Something about his tone felt wrong. Like his mind had detached from reality. How long do you think you can keep me here? When the bride disappears, they'll call the police. Paul, there's still time to stop this. Our eyes met. And then Paul laughed softly. Elizabeth, everything in this world is fake. Only you are real. No one will ever find us. He knelt in front of me, looking up with eyes full of devotion and madness. His smile trembled with yearning. We'll stay here together, love each other forever. My heart nearly stopped. It took me a long moment before I could speak again. What do you know? I whispered. Chapter 19. Paul didn't answer me, and just like he'd said, half a month passed, and no one had found us. Not a single trace. He even went out several times to buy supplies, without a disguise, without caution, and still, nothing happened. The doubt inside me grew heavier by the day. In this age of surveillance, it was impossible for someone to vanish this completely, unless something beyond this world was interfering. Was the system malfunctioning again? Paul, like a patient revived by false hope, seemed to regain his old cheerfulness. Every day, he pushed me around the villa in a wheelchair. His voice soft, his smile bright. This area, he said, is your reading corner. When you're tired, you can rest on that rocking chair. This is the recreation area. We can play chess together here when we're free. And this is an open kitchen. You used to say the old one was too small for two people. Now, we'll have plenty of space. He wheeled me out to the back garden, where a sea of flowers stretched as far as the eye could see. A breathtaking, fairy tale bloom. Paul's tone was filled with quiet joy. Elizabeth, every morning from now on, you can pick the freshest flowers yourself. Do you like it? I froze for a moment. Then I understood. This was it. Paul was rebuilding our wedding house, trying to mend what could no longer be mended. The thought was so absurd that it almost made me laugh. Don't you think it's a little too late for this? I asked quietly. Paul paused, then shook his head. No, it's not too late. We still have plenty of time. I looked at him, my voice steady. I don't love you, Paul. No matter what you do, I won't fall for you again, even if you keep me locked here forever. In the end, all you'll have is a corpse. As soon as the words left my mouth, a warm droplet fell onto the back of my hand. Paul was crying, in his tear-filled eyes. I saw my own reflection, a weaker, paler version of myself. The calm mask he wore cracked apart, revealing fear and confusion beneath. Then what should I do? He whispered hoarsely. What do I have to do to make you love me again? I lowered my eyes. Let go, Paul. We're just passing figures in each other's lives. No love is worth destroying yourself for. He shook his head firmly, eyes blazing with desperate resolve. I've already lived through the pain of letting go once. Elizabeth, you're my home. You're my oxygen. You're like plain water. Ordinary. Yes. But only when it's gone do I realize I can't live without it. The swirling emotions in his gaze finally hardened into something cold and unyielding. He wiped away the tears at the corners of his eyes. I won't make the same mistake twice. Chapter 20. I started making requests of Paul. To my surprise, he looked delighted, as if my demands were a sign of reconciliation. I hate sitting in a wheelchair, I told him. He immediately unchained my ankle, but then he sealed off the entire third floor. I could only move around the main level. Still, that was enough. Paul's image of me was frozen in time. 5 years ago, gentle, harmless, frail. He was certain that even if I wanted to escape, I'd be powerless to do so. But years of outdoor training had strengthened me. My arms were no longer soft and delicate. So when he left the house again, I went straight to the storage room, a place I had already inspected in secret. There was a small window there. The latch could be pried open. The outer wall had enough footholds for someone who knew how to climb. I'd made it halfway down when the ground suddenly rumbled. Then came a violent shake. My heart froze as the wall cracked open before my eyes. An earthquake. And then, a sound I hadn't heard in so long echoed in my head. Host. Follow my instructions immediately to escape the danger zone. There was no time to question it. I just ran, following its voice through the chaos. I didn't know how long I'd been running before I finally heard sirens. They were heading straight toward the villa when I stopped the rescuers. They told me the house had completely collapsed. Jack and Paul both had stayed behind to save me. Neither made it out in time. They were trapped beneath the rubble, alive or dead. No one knew. Numbly, I followed the rescue team back to the scene. Someone was shouting, waving their hands in panic, but I couldn't hear a single word. Then, the mechanical voice returned. "Host, calm down, they're still alive." I snapped out of my trance. Right, the system. It could save Jack, almost as if reading my thoughts. It spoke again. Saving them isn't without cost. You have two options. Option 1, save Paul. Mission success. You will live. Option 2, save Jack. Mission failure. You will die. Every trace of your existence will be erased. Apologies. Host, we must prioritize the target's welfare. I didn't even hesitate. I'll save Jack. The system stuttered for a full second. Do you know why I chose you as a host? Because your will to survive was stronger than anyone else's. You refused to die. And now you're throwing your life away for some insignificant side character? Elizabeth, have you lost your mind? For the first time, I heard emotion, anger, disbelief in that cold, mechanical voice. I smiled faintly, my voice soft. You don't understand anything. Chapter 21. I was born with a congenital illness. I couldn't jump. I couldn't run. Even walking a few extra steps would leave me gasping for air, while other children played and chased each other in the sunlight. I could only sit quietly, reading books, playing chess, watching life pass me by. Though I was constantly taking sick leave, I still loved going to school, because school had something the hospital never did. Youth, laughter, and the warmth of living people, not sterile white walls, and the smell of disinfectant. My classmates were kind to me. They called me Missy behind my back, envying my wealthy family, praising my manners, admiring my gentle nature. But that was as far as it went. They would push, tease, and play with each other. Yet whenever they were around me, they became stiff, careful, restrained, as if I were made of glass. I had no friends. No one wanted to be my friend. Eventually, my condition worsened, and I had to drop out of school completely. The hospital became my home, aside from medication and examinations. My days were spent in silence, sitting in my wheelchair, watching the big tree outside my window lose its leaves one by one. Mom and Dad came less and less. They had a new child. I told myself it was something to be happy about, but I had never felt lonelier. Then, one day, as the last leaf fell from that tree, I slowly closed my eyes. The tree would bloom again next spring, but I would never live to see 17. Chapter 22. I had already died in my original world. Even if I completed my mission here, I could never go back. At first, I accepted that fate quietly, that perhaps marrying Paul, living out a dull, peaceful life, was enough of a gift. But watching the way they lived, their choices, their freedom, ignited something inside me. I realized I didn't want to just exist anymore. I wanted a life completely different from before. I wanted to be loved with everything someone had, and I wanted to love with everything I had. And I was lucky, because I had both. You don't understand anything, I told the system, the moment I closed my eyes in that hospital bed. I already died once. Coming into this world, every second since then has been a gift. Jack isn't some insignificant side character. He's my lover, my husband. If I can save him, then I've already won. As soon as I finished speaking, a soft glow appeared in the distance, the place where Jack was buried. I hear him, I shouted to the rescue team. I ran toward the sound, knees scraping against twisted rebar, legs cut open by broken stone. The pain couldn't slow me down. Every second mattered. When we finally pried away the heavy wall trapping him, a hoarse, desperate voice broke through the dust. He was calling my name. By some miracle, Jack only had a few minor injuries. Relief flooded through me so hard, my knees nearly gave out. I rushed forward, throwing my arms around him. Jack, I'm okay. You can relax now. At the sound of my voice, his whole body went slack with relief. His voice trembled. Elizabeth. My fingertips traced the lines of his face, memorizing every contour, every shadow, and then I smiled, as tears slipped down my cheeks. Honey, let's go home. Jack tightened his arms around me, lifting me effortlessly off the ground. The weight of days and nights of fear finally lifted. All right, he whispered. Let's go home. Chapter 23. Paul, you lost the bet. He had discovered the secret of this world, and to stop him from taking his own life, the system had been forced to strike a deal with him. They made a wager, a cruel, desperate one. In 1 month's time, if Paul could make Elizabeth choose him, in a life and death situation, he would win. After all, back then, she had chosen to live, even if it meant marrying a man she didn't love, just to complete her mission. Surely, it would be the same this time. Paul had been so sure, but he was wrong. The system made him hear the entire conversation, every word of it. He listened as Elizabeth chose death without hesitation. To save Jack, Paul's pupils trembled violently, and the dull ache in his chest spread like wildfire through his body. Why? Why did Jack deserve such precious, unreserved love? When it was him who had been there first, him she had come into this world for. The protest rose in his heart like a scream, and spilled from his eyes as a single tear. The system's voice was merciless. According to the terms of the wager, your protagonist halo will be revoked. Your life and death will no longer affect the operation of this world. Elizabeth had already completed her mission. No matter whom she chose, her existence would not be erased. Still, her unwavering choice shocked even the system. As compensation for deceiving her, it granted her a blessing. She and Jack would live a smooth, peaceful life together, healthy, safe, and untouched by tragedy. The moment Paul's halo vanished, a slab of concrete came crashing down. The noise drew the rescuers' attention. They found him buried under the debris. Barely alive, he was rushed to the hospital, his body broken, his mind fading, and just before his consciousness slipped away, a single thought flickered weakly in his mind. If I could start over, would the ending be any different? Chapter 24. Paul woke up in the hospital, but something was wrong. The nurses passed by without looking at him, and the doctors walked straight through his body as if he were made of air. No one could see him. He could only wander like a lost soul through the corridors. Suddenly, his gaze stopped on a room, and he couldn't look away. In a wheelchair, a girl with a face as pale as paper was staring out the window at a withered tree. Her stillness hurt. Paul held his breath. Approaching slowly, she lifted her eyes and met his. Then she looked toward the woman beside her, confused. Can't she see you? Paul tried to steady his voice before answering. No, no one can see me. Elizabeth lowered her gaze, her fingers trembling slightly. Did you come to take me with you? Paul froze for a moment. No, I don't think so. She sighed in relief, and gave him a radiant smile. Thank you. From that day on, they became friends. They talked about everything and nothing, until, suddenly, Elizabeth fell silent. Paul followed her gaze. On the television, a commercial showed a woman, screaming with excitement as she went paragliding. It was the kind of adventure Sandra would have loved. But Elizabeth, her body stiffened. She looked at him, her eyes full of light. Do you think there's another life after this one? If there is, I'd like to try it someday. It was like being struck straight in the chest. A dry, burning pain that stole his breath away. In that moment, Paul understood. Elizabeth's love had begun to fade since then. Elizabeth used to say she didn't like the wheelchair. Elizabeth used to say she loved to walk. Elizabeth used to say she wanted to travel. Elizabeth used to say she dreamed of flying in a paraglider. And he, what did he ever do for her? If only he had gone with her that time. Would she have still loved him? Elizabeth waved a hand in front of his face. Are you okay? Paul looked at her slowly. His voice was rough. trembling. Yes, and in your next life, you'll have a healthy body. You'll meet someone who will go with you wherever you want, and you'll be happy for a whole lifetime. Elizabeth smiled, blushing. After that day, her health suddenly worsened. In the operating room, the doctors shook their heads. In the dim light, she turned her eyes toward an invisible point. As if she still wanted to say something, Paul leaned closer to listen, with a faint breath. She whispered, "Will that person be you?" Paul froze. He remembered the last thing the system had said, before he lost consciousness. "Who told you that you never had a second chance?" His throat tightened. Tears blurred his vision. He nodded with all his strength. Elizabeth smiled softly, and slowly closed her eyes. In his mind, a mechanical voice echoed, "Hello, host. Conquest System 003 at your service. Your mission target is Paul." In the intensive care unit, the heart monitor let out a sharp beep. A single tear slid down Paul's cheek, and his heart finally stopped.